As Europe faces growing geopolitical tensions, the balance between defence spending and green energy investments has become a crucial debate. While the EU pours billions into renewable energy, electric vehicles and infrastructure, some argue that these funds could instead bolster military capabilities. Welcome to Riks Europe, Björn Lomborg, author of Best Things First, False Alarm and Skeptical Environmentalist, and visiting fellow at Stanford University Hoover Institution.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So one thing you talk about are the 7 myths of climate change. Can you explain why climate change is not the end of the world as we are being taught?
Yes. So, Rebecca, this is incredibly important because, look, climate change is a real problem. But if you actually care to read some of the UN material that has been published, they publish every 7 years about 1,600 pages of what do we believe on climate change? What do we think is the most likely outcome? They tell us, yeah, it's a problem. They also very clearly tell us, no, this is not the end of the world. And the end of the world makes it impossible for us to have good conversations. If you think this is the end of the world, if you think this is a meteor hurtling towards Earth, nothing else matters. But the reality is, climate change is a problem, one of many in the 21st century that we need to fix. So just to give you a sense of some of these things that we're being told, we're being told that there's more and more fire in the world. No, we have NASA satellites covering the Earth 24/7 since the late 1990s. And since then, the amount of area that has burned on the planet each year has declined by about 1/4. We're not seeing more and more fire. We're actually seeing less. We're being told that extreme weather kills more and more people. No, we actually have good data for at least 100 years. It used to be in the 1920s, on average, every year, about 500,000 people died from floods, drought, storms, and wildfire. Today, that number is down below 10,000 people. It's been reduced by 98%. Again, none of this means that there's no climate problem, but it simply means that it's not this dramatic end of the world kind of thing that we think. And that, of course, means we can now start having a sensible conversation about, so what should we do about it?
And I'm quoting you from X here. The money the EU spends on things like solar panels, wind turbines, transmission lines, electric cars and chargers alone could fund Europe's needs for defense spending. This is a big debate right now. Can you elaborate on your thoughts there?
Yeah. So everybody's realizing Europe needs to spend a lot more on defense. And we also are spending an enormous amount of money pretty badly on climate policy, partly because we're worried, as we just talked about. So the reality is, last year, according to the Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the EU spent 367 billion euros on all those things that you talked about. What most people in the European conversation is talking about is that we need another $325 billion a year for our defense. So I just simply put up those two numbers. We're spending more on pretty useless climate initiatives than all the money we need for defense. Maybe we should start talking about, well, maybe we should spend most of this on our defense. And then also realize there are much, much smarter and simpler and cheaper ways to fix climate. So just to give you one example, I helped run a big conference where we put together about 50 of the world's top climate economists, 3 Nobel laureates in economics, to find out where can you do the most good for every dollar or euro or kroner spent on climate. And the simple answer is focus on innovation. Innovation has always been what fixes problems in the world. It's not to tell people to be poor, it is to innovate new and better technology. If we could innovate green energy to be cheaper than fossil fuels, everyone would switch, not just rich, well, meaning Europeans, but also the Chinese, the Indians, and the Africans. And so my point is, we have good evidence that shows a much better climate policy would focus on dramatically increasing innovation. This would be much, much cheaper. This would not be putting up thousands and tens of thousands of solar panels or wind turbines that we already know don't work. It would instead be to focus on getting the next generations of green energy technology. That could be fourth generation nuclear. It could also be solar with lots and lots of batteries and lots of other opportunities. But the point is, if we invested in that, we could spend about 30 to 35 billion euros a year on climate innovation. That's much, much more than what we're spending right now. And it would leave beside the entire funding for the defense needs that Europe has. So I'm simply saying, stop wasting 367 billion euros on bad climate policy. Spend it smarter. You can also spend much less. And that actually leaves up more than 325 billion euros a year for defense, which is exactly what everybody is talking about. So there's the money, and we could do smarter in climate at the same time.
So do you think that prioritizing green energy investments over defense could pose a threat to the EU in the future? Or is it a good long-term strategy?
Look, it definitely does. Perhaps the most obvious way it does is if we focus on doing a lot of green stuff to feel good about ourselves, it means that we leave ourselves more vulnerable. We know that on the defense field. You know, if you actually put in electric tanks, electric tanks. What are you going to do when they need to recharge? Do we really think that Putin is going to say, sure, well, just wait until you've recharged? So, I mean, and more obviously, you know, if you use biofuels for fighter jets, it means that they can carry less bombs. There are real costs here. But of course, the more important long-term issue for Europe is that we're essentially hobbling ourselves by putting on more cost, using less effective energy, and that slows our economic growth. A Europe that grows less than everyone else around the world will eventually be an impoverished Europe. We will be less powerful. We will be more easily overrun. So the long-term impact is obviously that if we have very little growth, which Europe has had for the last couple of decades, we are much, much more vulnerable.
One thing you've written about is the link that people make with climate change and global hunger. How do you respond to the critics who argue that climate change is still a major security threat to Europe and the world, but also is linked to things like migration, crop failure, and global hunger?
I'm sympathetic to that argument. And again, I actually tried to outline for you that we can fix both climate change and the military challenge if we spend smartly on climate. There is a problem. And we're an advanced civilization. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can actually try to fix both problems. But we cannot do that if we scare everyone witless and spend money willy-nilly on all kinds of really poor investments like we're doing right now. So yes, there is a connection. Yes, there is a concern with climate change. And if we deal with it through innovation, we can deal so smartly. But when people worry about all these things, just like we talked about with fire and many of these other things, the people dying from climate-related disasters, when people talk about hunger, yes, climate change will make it slightly harder to produce food, which doesn't mean we'll produce less food, but it means that farmers will have to adjust and adapt a little more, and that has real costs. So we expect that in the future, we will see ever less hunger. We will see more people better fed. But because of climate change, it will go slightly slower. So the progress will be slightly slower. That's still a problem. And that's one of the reasons why we should be concerned about climate change and we should spend smartly on climate change. But right now, that's not what we're doing. We're spending stupidly and incredibly costly on things that will have very little impact even in 100 years. So yes, there's a problem. We're smart enough to deal with both problems, but only if we do this smartly. And that means not spending a lot of money badly.
You've written The Skeptic Environmentalist, and I know that you've received criticism as well and been called all sorts of negative things. And, you know, in today's debates that are very rigid, you are either a friend of the environment and climate change or you are against these policies. So how are you able to sort of tie together the two?
So I think almost everyone wants to help the environment. We want a healthy environment. We want to have better air quality and water quality and all these other things. But of course, we should also remember that there's, at least 4 or 5 billion people on the planet who are in much more dire need of just simply getting enough food and getting medical attention and getting good education and all these other very basic things. So it's easy for rich people to worry about the environment exclusively, but we need to remember that the rest of the world actually have much more urgent issues as well. We can, again, we're a smart civilization, we can actually handle a lot of different things, but only if we deal with these problems sensibly. And so when you're asking, can you be for and against? Well, I'm not against the environment. I'm against the way that we've made environment into this feel-good exercise. A lot of environment has become this, no, I have to feel good inside. That's a terrible way to make your analysis. You should be focusing on policies that will actually do good, policies that are incredibly effective, policies that spend tax dollars as tax kroners or tax euros in the most effective way. So I'm skeptical of the way that a lot of the environment is being presented as this end of the world, spend all the money that's necessary and give me all your money. That's not the right way to do it. We should be spending smarter, so that we can also spend on all these other issues, so we can both have a good environment and defend ourselves and have enough food for kids in the developing world.
And you mentioned this climate apocalypse, but at the same time that we should fight climate change. What is, to sum it up, what is the direction that we should be taking that we aren't taking now?
So right now, we're either incredibly scared about climate change and think we need to spend a lot of money on fixing this one problem and sort of ignoring everything else. Or, as you pointed out, a lot of other people on the other side are just saying, oh, ignore all that crap with the environment and just worry about, defense or something. That's no way to deal with issues one way or the other. There are a lot of different challenges. Climate is one. It's not the end of the world kind of thing, but it is an important problem. Likewise, certainly, defense is a huge problem. And again, for many other people on the planet, lots of other problems like these very, very simple things like getting enough food and making sure your kids don't die from easily curable infectious diseases. We need to be able to do all of this, and we can only do that if we're smart. On climate, that means stop buying lots of wind turbines that currently don't work and just simply make electricity more expensive. Instead, focus on making new energy breakthroughs so that eventually the next generations of green energy will be so cheap everyone will want them. If we could make, and I'm just saying this as an example, I don't necessarily believe this is going to work, but fourth generation nuclear is being marketed as this opportunity where we can get incredibly safe and incredibly cheap green electricity. That'd be amazing if this is true. We should certainly be funding the exercises to make sure that we've investigated whether that's possible. If it is, that would fix most of our problems because we'd have cheap green energy. Everyone would buy it, not just rich, well-meaning people here in Sweden, but crucially also people in China, India, and Africa. And that's what's going to solve climate. If we do that smartly and cheaply, we'll have enough resources to deal with all the other issues as well.
Thank you very much, Björn Lomborg, author of Best Things First, False Alarm and Skeptical Environmentalist, and visiting fellow at Stanford University Hoover Institution.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.